And to understand this, I started to do interviews during the beginning of the pandemic. Like what, and this is with the business owners, the small business owners renting from the associations. So I went out and tried to see what their situation was, if they got help from their association, and what they see as some kind of patterns and explanation for how associations work with their ground floors, and some kind of summary of that is that they are decentralized, so they all work with their own association. That is what the storefront owners, like the business owners, said. They work with their own association. The organizations are run based on ideals and their economic capacity and the perspectives of the board members. And this means that the personal finances of these apartment owners are actually very important, and that defines the monthly fee that they are paying. And within that economic structure is where the rent that the business owners pay fall into. So making a change there, or being generous, or having a lot of sympathy, is actually comes down to the personal finances of the apartment owners. They found that there is difficult communication with the board members, even though they live like in the same building or move through the same front door. The board members are often unskilled. They don't have like a formal education in like urban planning or economy or property management. There is some kind of interest for chain stores that provide a stable economy, that are clean and quiet at night and don't produce like a lot of smells. And tenants are generally afraid to ask about rent increase or to communicate about these like sensitive topics. And the association has their own ideas about how it is to run a business. They think a business location, a busy location, is always a good location. So every association makes their own decisions, led by those with seats on the board. So it's very, very decentralized and very upon like every association themselves, which makes it very hard to create some kind of wider vision for a street. And so research told me that from retail gentrification, there is a tendency that rents start to rise, and that makes chain stores actually the only really that can pay these increasing rents, and that leads to a decline of the area, which is actually a paradox. What I found interesting is that actually the retail gentrification creates a negative impact on how we experience the street. So people moving into a more gentrified area, buying an apartment, and then changing the ground floor situation so that there is a new renter that maybe doesn't actually go in line with like the initial vision or the initial experience of the environment, leads actually to something negative. And the reason for that is short-term economic gain from associations, and it falls into the neoliberal trend of commodification of the attractive city image. And the duties of the board, they are voluntary, they're temporary, and they're time-consuming. Members act out of self-interest with a lack of long-term perspective, and they focus too much on keeping monthly costs low. So there is a little bit of an interesting like reflection of that in what I see here in the literature. So what we see is that people move into the area and start to focus on their finances and actually bring a decline to the area. If we are not worried about that, that might happen to like the central areas of Stockholm that I think they're not yet in like this mature retail gentrification, but you see around Odenplan that there's a lot more chain stores popping up, and that area starts to become like a clone of other areas in Stockholm, and it loses like the authentic area that once attracted so many people to live there. So what can be done about this? This is the final part of my research that I started to look into, and I looked into the curating toolbox. And from that, I looked into retail resilience, like creating a retail planning approach that is built on resilience and that is able to adapt and it's able to work with multiple active stakeholders that balance both like the public and the private interests. So how does that actually work in Stockholm, and do we have any good examples? I interviewed these organizations that in some way, one way or another, work with retail planning in Stockholm. The Stockholm City Planning Office, City in Samverkan, Stockholm Business Region, Stockholm Beauty Council, Svenska Stadskärnor, Fastighetsägarna, and Gamla Stans Företagareförening. And I try to place them in some kind of model to see how do they actually work with retail? Are they a direct stakeholder, or are they more on the policymaker side? Do they work in practice, or do they work more on a network level? And from the interviews, I found a number of tools that are interesting when curating ground floors. In Linköping central area, they work with a vision agreement. So they have all of the actors in the area working on, like, they sign off a vision agreement and they work towards that. In the CBD in Stockholm, they work with the area vision, something similar. There's also the business improvement districts that have that is working in Sergelstorg, for instance. In Gamla Brogatan in Stockholm, there is cooperative housing associations that collaborate, which is quite unique. In Gamla Stan, there is a heritage guideline that every storefront needs to follow for some kind of coherence. There is also a business association in Gamla Stan that unites all the businesses. That is quite unique in Sweden. And having one property owner can also be like a tool for curating ground floors. But what are the challenges then for retail planning in Stockholm? There is a lack of coordination and collaboration. For instance, on Kungsgatan, there is the property owners work together, but they only work with infrastructure. So there is this lack of like working on different kind of levels. City in Samverkan works mostly with keeping things clean and safe, and not so much on like the ground floor curation side. There is a loss of local commerce, and that comes with like the loss of cultural heritage. There's displacement by e-commerce and the rise of chain stores. So what are the lessons from other cities and how can they apply to cities like Stockholm? This is what I explored in my last paper that I'm in the process of publishing. Yes, what's the time? Okay, I'm a little bit early, but this was my presentation. I hope you pick something up from this, and I'm open for a Q&A, so please fire any questions and I try to answer as best as I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosa. What a comprehensive work you have done, and so interesting to see like the bostadsrättsföreningar's impact and the paradox of rising rents and chain stores. It was very impressive. I can't see any questions in the chat, so if people have any questions, you are free to ask Rosa now.